A corridor filled with smoke, and a girl in a shirtwaist apron slammed her palms against a steel door that should have opened to daylight. It didn't. Behind her, the factory floor was already flashing orange. In front of her, the knob was cold and useless, because the exit wasn't an exit. It was a control point. In a fire, that difference kills. So why was leaving forbidden in the first place? It's New York City, March 25th, 1911. The Ash Building rises over Washington Place and Green Street, 10 stories of modern loft space, exactly the kind of place people pointed to as the future. On the upper floors, Triangle Shirtwaist is running full tilt. Rows of machines rattle, needles flickering so fast the eye can't follow. Cutting tables are packed tight. Paper patterns hang like pale flags. Underfoot the scraps form drifts, thin cotton and tissue that collect in corners, under tables, along the aisles. The air tastes of cloth dust and machine oil. The windows are cracked because it's early spring, but inside it's still warm from bodies and motors. Foremen pace the lanes, watching hands, watching output, watching time. The workday is almost over, and that makes everyone dangerous. People rushing to finish a seam, to hit quota, to grab a coat and get downstairs before the crowd clogs the stairs. And that's where the first rule of this place shows itself. The exits are not treated as freedom. They're treated as valves. One stair door is the Washington Place way out. On normal days, it's the shortest path to the street, and it's also the one management likes to control. Workers whisper about it the way you whisper about a locked gate. Sometimes it's open, sometimes it isn't, and asking questions marks you as trouble. The excuse is always practical, preventing theft, preventing long breaks, keeping people from slipping out early. The result is simpler. The flow of bodies belongs to the owners. Max Blank and Isaac Harris don't walk the floor like foremen do, but their rules do. A locked door doesn't need a man standing beside it. It stands by itself, quiet authority in a factory that never stops moving. On the 9th floor, girls and women sit shoulder to shoulder. Many are teenagers. Many speak Yiddish or Italian more easily than English. They work with their elbows tucked in because there isn't room to spread out. When a chair scrapes back, 3 other chairs have to adjust. When someone stands, the line shifts. The whole room is a single crowded organism stitched together by the need to keep sewing. Downstairs on the 8th floor, the end-of-day rush starts. Someone shakes out a pile of trimmings. Someone later swears a cigarette was involved. An ember, a match, a careless flick. Nobody can prove it in the moment, because the moment is too fast. A flame catches in the scrap bin. At first it's nothing. A tongue of fire licking cotton, then retreating, then returning stronger. Someone stamps at it. Someone grabs a pail. The fire ignores them. It climbs. It finds tissue patterns hanging overhead like kindling. It runs along the tabletops as if the wood has been waiting. A shout rises. Fire! The word moves faster than smoke. Men bolt toward the stair. Women push back their chairs. Machines keep rattling for a few seconds because hands don't stop instantly. Then panic hits the room and everything becomes motion. Bodies standing, chairs tipping, work abandoned mid-stitch. On the 9th floor, the first warning is not flame. It's the smell. Sharp, burning cloth. The sick sweetness of scorched cotton. Then smoke slides under a door seam like a living thing. Someone near the windows turns and sees it. A grey haze thickening over the stair landing. For a heartbeat, people hesitate because their brains refuse the idea. It's late. The day is almost done. Fires happen. They get put out. You don't destroy a shift over a small blaze. Then the smoke darkens. A girl stands on her chair to see over heads and screams, "It's coming up!" The room breaks. Bodies surge toward the exits. There are roots down, and everyone knows the basics in a dull, practiced way. They move toward the Washington Place door because it's closer. It's the one you can reach in seconds if you're fast. A cluster hits the corridor first. They slam into the door, fingers scrabbling for the latch, shoulders pressing. Someone yells for space. Someone else yells there's no space. The knob turns once, then stops hard. The door doesn't budge. A woman pounds it with both fists, not understanding at first. Another tries the lock again, harder, as if force can make metal forget it's locked. The crowd behind them compresses. Heat rises. Smoke thickens at ankle level, then knee level, then chest level. Someone screams the sentence that turns panic into terror. It's locked. In that instant, the factory reveals what it really is. Not just a workplace, but a trap built out of productivity and control. Subscribe and hit like, because the next minutes inside Triangle show what happens when a locked door decides who gets to live. Smoke does a strange thing in a crowded room. It turns every choice into a bottleneck. At the Washington Place door, the first women to reach the lock are still fighting it, shoulder and hip pressed to steel, fingernails scraping for a latch that isn't there. Behind them, the crowd keeps arriving. People don't evacuate, they surge. Someone shouts that the other stair is open. The words spread like a current. Green Street. The second stairwell, the one farther, the one management didn't like using, becomes the only hope. Bodies peel away from the locked door and rush the aisles, knocking chairs, catching skirts on table corners. Machines sit threaded with fabric, needles frozen mid-stitch, as if the factory can't decide whether to keep producing or start dying. On the 8th floor below, the fire is already past small. A supervisor tries to beat it down with a pail, then another, then realizes the water is losing. Someone gets to a telephone and shouts upward for help. The message reaches the floor above the fire and then skips. On the 10th floor, they get warning. A cutter looks down the stair opening and sees smoke rolling up like it has weight. He yells, and the 10th floor breaks into motion, pushing toward the stairs before the air turns fully black. On the 9th floor, the warning arrives late, through smell, through heat, through the sudden change in the way people run. At the Green Street door, a man yanks it open. For a second, the stairwell looks like salvation, narrow steps going down into dimness, away from flame. Then the crowd hits it. People cram shoulder to shoulder, hands on the backs in front of them, feet searching for the next step. Someone trips and disappears down a few stairs. The people behind can't stop. Stopping isn't possible when bodies are pushing from both sides. A woman screams because she can't lift her foot. Someone is on it. Smoke is coming up from below faster than the crowd can go down. Hot breath is trapped between walls. The stairwell becomes its own trap. Crush, heat, and air turning sour. A few men try to fight downward anyway and vanish into the dark. Others feel the heat punch their faces and retreat, coughing, forced back onto the floor they're trying to escape. Some still make it. They spill out on lower levels coughing, faces smeared with soot, eyes streaming, then run for daylight. On the sidewalk, survivors turn back to look up because your body does that when it escapes the first wave. It tries to understand what it left behind. Inside, smoke climbs and finds every opening like water finding low ground. The elevator bell rings. The elevators are small cages with operators who know the building's rhythm. Now the rhythm is panic. The operator drives the car up into smoke, opens to a wall of faces, and people shove in until the cables groan. The car drops, unloads, and goes back up again and again, each trip hotter, faster, more desperate. Hands get pinched in gates, shoulders get crushed. Still the car returns, because it's the only moving thing that looks like hope. On the 9th floor, the locked Washington Place door is no longer just an obstacle. It turns the corridor into a pocket of death. Smoke thickens until faces vanish at 10 feet. People crouch low, then lower, because they've heard the advice, stay under the smoke, only to find there is no under when the room fills fast. Heat rolls in like a tide, fabric catches, tissue patterns flutter and ignite mid-air. The fire gains speed the way fire gains speed when fed by cloth, not creeping, racing along surfaces, jumping gaps, creating new points of flame faster than hands can point at them. Someone throws a shoulder into the Washington Place door again and again. The metal stays solid. It was built to keep workers in. In that moment, it succeeds perfectly. On the far side, a narrow metal fire escape waits outside a window, an afterthought bolted to brick. People force the sash up and climb out. The first few grip cold metal and move, then the crowd piles onto it. It sways under weight, flexing in wind. The metal groans, then a section jerks, tilts and drops. Bodies fall into the courtyard, a hard distance with no net at all. Those who can't reach stairs or escape move to the windows because windows at least offer air. Faces appear behind glass, young, terrified, blackened by soot. Hands slap panes. Some look down and see the street filling with people staring up. Firefighters arrive with ladders that reach only so far. A net is stretched below like a desperate imitation of safety. It looks thin. It looks hopeful. It looks wrong. On the 9th floor, a girl climbs onto the sill. The heat behind her is now a physical shove. Her hair is singed. Her blouse is smoking at the hem. She looks down, then back once, as if searching for a door that might have changed its mind. It hasn't. She jumps, The air takes her instantly, and the crowd below makes a sound no report ever captures. Outside the ash building, the first people didn't understand what they were hearing. They heard screams, then saw faces at 9th floor windows, dozens of them, pressed to glass that was already fogging with smoke. A few workers on the sidewalk pointed up and shouted instructions that didn't matter. "Go to the stairs," they yelled, as if stairs were a choice and not a crowd. Fire engines arrived with bells and iron wheels, men jumping down before the rigs fully stopped. Hoses were dragged to hydrants, couplings slammed together with practiced violence. A captain looked up, took in the height, and his expression changed, because he could already see the problem. The fire wasn't on a 1st or 2nd floor where ladders win. It was high, above the reach of the city's fastest rescue. To understand why the street becomes helpless so quickly, you have to picture the gap between floors and equipment. Fire ladders of the era could not simply stretch to the 9th floor like a modern aerial. They climbed, yes, but not enough. The building was too tall, and the people were too far above the street for the tools below to matter. And still, the firefighters tried. One ladder went up, then another. Men climbed until the ladder ends trembled and stopped, short of the windows where hands were beating glass. The firefighters looked up at girls leaning out into smoke and could do nothing but wave them back, because leaning out too far meant falling. But staying inside meant burning. At the windows, the heat behind the workers became a physical force. Cloth on tables was catching and flashing. Tissue patterns were igniting like paper lanterns. The air turned toxic, and every breath became a choice between choking now or choking in 10 seconds. Some workers found the roof. On the top floor, a few men forced their way up to a roof door and got it open. Cold air hit their faces like salvation. They poured onto the roof and ran toward the edge where an adjacent building sat close enough to matter. Someone threw boards across like a rough bridge. A handful crawled over, hands shaking, bodies low, fear making them careful for once. Below them, on the 9th floor, there was no careful. There was only crowd. The Green Street stairwell was a choke point of heat and bodies. Those who tried to descend felt the smoke rising like a wave. Those who turned back found the floor behind them turning orange. In the corridor by Washington Place, the locked door became the deadliest object in the building, not because it burned, but because it held. People kept returning to it, again and again, the way humans return to the last thing that should work. They slammed it, kicked it, clawed at the lock until fingernails tore. The metal stayed indifferent. It had been designed for control, and in the fire it performed perfectly. On the street a net was stretched. It looked like a promise. Canvas held by men gripping ropes, bracing their feet, shouting for jumpers to aim. The first body hit it, and the net sagged violently. The men holding it staggered. A second hit, then a third, heavier, faster, and the net tore or buckled under forces it was never meant to absorb. People fell through, others bounced out. The crowd screamed anyway because even when the net worked, the impact broke bodies. At the windows, the workers saw the net fail and understood something horrifying. There was no safe option left, only less terrible ones. A girl climbed onto the sill, hesitated, and then jumped because the flames had reached her back. 2 more followed. Then it wasn't individuals anymore. It was a sequence. Bodies dropping, skirts flaring, arms spread instinctively, the street below turning into a place where people couldn't look away. Firefighters shouted, trying to time catches, trying to guide jumps, trying to do anything that resembled control. Police pushed the crowd back because the sidewalk was becoming a crush of spectators and grief. A man fainted in the street. Another tried to run forward and was restrained. It was a public disaster unfolding in full daylight, and everyone could see it. Inside, the elevator made its last runs. The operator brought the car up into smoke again and again, opening the gate to a wall of faces that shoved in until the cables groaned. Each trip down brought a few more alive into the lobby, coughing and bleeding, eyes wild. One time the doors opened and a woman fell in half-conscious, hair singed, hands blistered. Another time the car arrived with too many and still tried to go back up. Then the heat warped the mechanism. The elevator stalled. The shaft became a chimney. The operator was forced to stop, not because he chose to, but because the building took the choice away. On the 9th floor, the windows became crowded with people who hadn't jumped yet, not because they were braver, but because they were still searching for an exit that might open. Some waved cloth to signal they were alive. Some screamed names. A few climbed out onto narrow ledges, backs pressed to brick, trying to find air in inches. A firefighter on a ladder reached upward with a gloved hand and came up short by a floor, then another half. He looked up at a woman leaning out with smoke curling around her head and knew he couldn't touch her. That helplessness is what turns a fire into a reckoning. When the flames finally began to lose their grip, after hoses found angles, after water started biting back, after enough fuel had been consumed, the building didn't feel saved. It felt emptied. Firefighters forced their way upward into rooms that were now blackened and quiet. They found machines still threaded, tables still piled with cloth, chairs overturned like a room abandoned mid-sentence. They found bodies collapsed in corners where people had tried to breathe under the smoke. They found the shapes of crowds where crowds had hit dead ends. And at the Washington Place door they found the proof of what everyone outside had already suspected. A door that people had reached, a door they had trusted, a door that didn't open. The metal was hot. The lock was intact. The corridor behind it told the rest of the story without words. Downstairs, as survivors were wrapped in blankets and led away, the story began to change in the mouths of witnesses. It stopped being a terrible fire and became, they were trapped. It stopped being bad luck and became, why were the doors locked? On the sidewalk, people stared up at the building's windows long after the jumping stopped, because their eyes had learned something they didn't want to know. In a factory built for output, leaving had been treated as a privilege, and when the fire came, privileges became verdicts. By evening, the fire was out. The building was still standing, and that was almost obscene, because inside, the factory floors looked like a war had happened in a single hour. Firefighters and police moved through blackened rooms that still smelled of cloth and oil, only now it was mixed with wet ash and something heavier that nobody wanted to name. Machines sat exactly where they'd been left, belts slack, needles still threaded. Cutting tables were scorched along the edges. Patterns had burned into flakes that stuck to boots. In the corridors, the story of the last minutes was written in the way bodies had fallen. Clusters where people had tried to breathe low, piles where they had run out of space, and the awful stillness of corners where the heat had cornered them first. At the Washington Place stair door, they found what the survivors had been screaming about in the street, the exit that didn't function as an exit. It wasn't warped open, it wasn't broken from panic. It was closed like it had been closed before the smoke ever rose, because it wasn't built for emergency. It was built for control. The next day, the city turned the fire into a procession. Bodies were lined up for identification because grief needs structure when the number becomes too big. Families arrived in waves, mothers gripping sleeves, fathers with faces set hard like stone, friends and neighbours who came because nobody in those neighbourhoods believed they would be spared by luck alone. People walked past rows of the dead and tried to recognise a face through soot and burns. Some did, some didn't. Some recognised a ring, a shoe, a scrap of clothing that shouldn't have been enough to identify a person and still was. The number settled like a weight, 146. Not a rumour, not an estimate. A count that made the city stop pretending this was just a tragedy. Tragedies are accidents. This felt engineered. Here's the detail that matters when the story tries to soften itself into disaster. The fire itself was fast, yes. The materials were flammable, yes. The floors were crowded, yes. But people can outrun fire when they have space and exits. The thing that turned heat into mass death was the moment a worker reached a door and discovered leaving wasn't fully in her hands. That's when the building stopped being on fire and started being a cage. Survivors told the story the same way, even when their voices shook. They described the locked Washington Place door not as a surprise, but as a familiar fact, something they lived with every day. Some said they had watched it locked near quitting time to control the rush. Others said it was locked to stop theft, to stop unauthorized breaks, to keep the workforce in place like inventory. Whatever the justification, the outcome was identical. In the one moment a locked door becomes unforgivable, it was locked. Blank and Harris, the owners, did what owners always do after the dead are counted. They tried to make the system sound like a misunderstanding. They talked about standards. They talked about responsibility. They talked about how nobody could have predicted a fire that fast. They talked about how exits existed, how employees had options, how panic made everything worse. But panic doesn't lock a door. Panic doesn't narrow a stairwell. Panic doesn't pile scraps under tables for months because cleaning would slow production. Panic doesn't treat leaving like something a worker must be allowed to do. A courtroom can only hold so much horror at once, so it breaks horror into questions. Was the door locked? Who had the key? Was it common practice? Did anyone order it? Did anyone check it? Did anyone think about what control becomes when smoke arrives? The answers didn't bring the dead back. They did something colder. They showed the logic that killed them had been ordinary. And outside courtrooms, the city's anger moved faster than any verdict. Funerals stacked up. Black cloth appeared in windows. Neighborhoods that fed those factories started looking at factory doors differently, like every latch was a threat until proven otherwise. Workers marched. Reformers pushed. Inspectors suddenly mattered. Not because compassion had finally been discovered, but because the spectacle had been too public to ignore. You could feel the shift in the way people spoke about workplace rules. A poster that says "Don't do this" suddenly sounded like a lie if the building itself wasn't built to let you escape. A management claim about order suddenly sounded like violence if the price of order was being trapped. Triangle became a wound the city couldn't hide under progress, and that's why this story still matters. Because the most frightening part isn't the flame, it's the mindset that makes a locked exit feel reasonable, right up until the exact second it becomes a death sentence. The same thinking that says productivity is fragile, that control is necessary, that workers must be managed like they can't be trusted to leave, until smoke proves the only thing they needed was the right to get out. The fire ended in an hour. The consequences didn't. If you want to be part of one community that keeps these stories honest, subscribe so we stay together here. Hit like if you think safety should never depend on obedience, and comment this: should any workplace door ever be allowed to lock from the inside, yes or no?